So good. All right, well, this orientation is the first stop of many in our summer content series. We created Brand Camp because we believe brand is foundational, period. But we also know that it's very misunderstood, and so we're here to provide some inspiration and education around the topic. How this is going to work is we will hold several sessions for the next few months, each covering a different angle of brand. Everything will be recorded, and you can find them at askpivot.com/brandcamp. I will put the link in the chat. Brandon Waybright is our creative director. Many of you have probably worked with him. He is the backbone of this series. Don't let that get to your head, Brandon. Think of him as our head camp counselor, a really cool one though, not one that makes you go to bed at 7 o'clock. You might be joining because you think your logo needs an update, or you wish your team had a stronger grasp on your brand values, or maybe you just feel nostalgic about going to summer camp, which is fine. We love camping. Whatever the case, we're happy that you are here. Please continue to use the chat, the Q&A. We love a lively chat here at Pivot, don't we, Brandon?
Oh yeah. Please try to distract us at all
Yeah,
moments.
yes, yeah,
I want it so bad. I
yes,
feed off of
he
it.
really does. Speaking of Brandon, he really is the perfect person to lead this series. If you've worked with him, you know why. He lives on a small farm and is certified in search and rescue, which I just found out this morning. So to me, that gives him a lot of credibility. And he also used to be a professor and taught on this very topic. And he's worked with some really big and awesome brands, like you might have heard of Disney or Nike, to name a few. uh, anyway, we've got some really great content for today. We hope that this is fun. We don't like boring webinars at Pivot. We want it to be fun and engaging. And so remember, it's orientation. Sit back, relax, take it all in, ask questions throughout, and we're going to have fun. Brandon might blow that whistle really hard into the mic at some point. I'm hoping he doesn't. So just everyone is warned to turn down your volume. All right, Brandon, take it away.
Nice. I was told that if I did that, they would take my whistle away. So
Yeah,
the only
I'll
the
drive.
only
I'll
thing
drive
that
all
will
the way over to
work.
your house and take it away.
All right, I have one more chat thing just to keep you going in here because I am very curious as we start this series about like why are you showing up today? And it could be any number of these reasons. You could respond to this as simply in the chat as just typing in a number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If it's 6, maybe it's something else. Feel free to throw in a word of why you're actually here. You might be in a spot where you're just thinking about updating or revisiting your brand. I love it. We're seeing a website, find an edge on competition, getting your organization noticed. Love it. Ooh, a big range. Nice. Yes, just curious. Love it. Diana loves brand talk. Into it. So cool. Oh, Charlie, you're too nice. All of the above, also really great. Rock on. Well, you can keep going there. Keep rolling. Here, I'll give the one person who asked a very soft whistle. There you go. That's my one whistle for today. Very weak whistle. One thing I wanted to make sure you know, this is just part of a series of things. We have a whole slew of stuff planned for you throughout the summer. They are all free. And other than the one that is happening next, which is for Pivot Plus clients only. And if you want to become a Pivot Plus client, you can always email Dawn. I will have her contact info for you about how that works. But other than that June 5th campfire chat, all of these are open to the public. Everything that we're doing on a webinar is going to be recorded. You can register for them at a site that I will show you in just a second, but you also can come back to the site later to see a recorded video of it. So I know you probably didn't read all the things on there. All of that, you can find all that info of the sessions that are coming this summer and all the stuff is at askpivot.com/brand camp. So that site is live today. It has ways to register for the things that are already set up. And as we finish things and make recordings, those will also get populated there so you can always revisit them. So you might want to bookmark that or hit that up. Don just dropped it into the chat as well, so you can have that. The other thing I wanted to throw in there is all of these sessions, we're going to try to make some time for Q&A, but we also know the reality is that you never get to all the questions. And sometimes the best questions you don't end up getting to in the moment because you just run out of time. For that, I have some hope for you all. We are going to be doing something this summer called Camp Snacks. Rachel Getzinger and I, if you have not worked with Rachel, I feel sad for you because she is glorious and way more fun than me. But we are going to be taking the questions that come up in this series, and anything we don't get to, we're going to give you our most honest, quick, direct feedback response to it and posting that on our social channels. So we're going to discuss those things together and bring them there. So if you don't get a question answered today, feel free to shoot emails over, or feel free to at least throw it in the chat, because we're going to be collecting all that, and we are going to be making even more material around branding based on your questions. And you can see some of our answers to it in this series called Camp Snacks that'll be rolling out on Instagram and LinkedIn. Follow us. We want you to follow us. It's great. That's my whole housekeeping spiel, though, because you came here to actually like learn something or find something. And today what we are doing is really setting just like a high level look at branding. What does it look like? How are we going to map out a brand journey? So we have some of our sessions that come along later in the series. We're going to get into very specific elements. We're going to focus just on voice, or we're going to focus just on like brand strategy, or we're going to focus just on execution and how you move from branding to marketing work. Right now, what I want to do is kind of lay out a map of a good brand journey and adventure. So there's going to be kind of 3 sections, and we are going to have a little pause in the middle to have a little time for 1, for me to breathe, 2, for you to also already barrage me with questions if you have them as we go. And do feel free at any time that something pops into your head as a question to throw it into the chat. I likely won't answer it in that exact moment, but Dawn is watching all of those things and will be throwing those things at me later. So you don't have to wait for me to say, do you have any questions? You can throw the question the minute it pops into your head. That goes for Pivot folks as well as everyone else who's on this call. Anyone can be there. So y'all ready? I know I can't hear you say it. I can't hear you, but it's gonna be awesome. I'm so excited for this series, and I'm really excited for today. The place I want to start is this idea of a brand adventure. Like, we are going to camp, and we chose the idea of brand camp very specifically because I think of branding as a very adventurous thing. And we're going to talk a little bit about that right from the start here. But before, I'm going to ask you yet another thing to send me some answers in the chat. If you had to choose one of these things, what do you think is most important to making a great brand? 1, your brand needs to be consistent. 2, it needs to be distinctive. 3, it needs to be interactive. 4, it needs to be story-driven. What matters most? Or maybe it's not on there and you're like, there's something else. Give me that 5. Ooh, I love it. Started off with some heavy 1s, but now we're seeing some range come through. Love it, love it, love it. I see some people already like, you are already starting with a trick question. I'm going to answer some way that doesn't choose 1. I love it. I love you people who break the rules. You are my favorite people. And that's actually very sincere. Anyone who knows me knows I really mean that. Let me tell you a little story that kind of gets at the heart of of this, about that consistency, distinction, or sometimes the word around branding is called differentiation, just because we like it to be even more hard to say. Or whether it needs to be interactive, whether it needs to be story-driven. Let me tell you a story, because I want to just brag on my dad for a moment here. Here he is. This is my actual dad. I want to tell you about him. I want to tell you a little story. And particularly, I don't want to talk about him just in general. I want to talk about the time that my dad went to an emo concert. And yes, that is actually me from my emo band days. My dad showed up at an emo show that my band was playing. And from his photo alone, you can probably see, like, this is not his scene. This is not the look his brand is associated with. But he showed up. He listened. He maybe had fun. I'm not sure. And he showed up because he's the #1 supporter of his kids. That is his thing. Now, that show did not fit him. Like, he did not wear his suit and tie that day. He did his best to adapt to the room and put on a graphic tee, and he still looked very out of place. He listened to us play and scream and make awful noises. No phone, no earplugs. He was there, just a West Virginia man, born and raised, spent his adulthood pastoring a Midwestern church, guy there at a beer-stinking underground indie show in Nowhereville, Illinois. Because that's who he is. He's a good dad. The thing that I like about this, and why I actually think this has a lot to say about brand, is because he nailed each of those 4 things we just put up in the right spot. He was very consistent in that moment, but not in how he looked. He didn't show up with a tie to the emo show. He put on some kind of graphic tee and tried to look as casual as a dad can look at an emo concert. His consistency came in him showing up. It came in a value that he held, in something that mattered to him. And then it was different. It was distinctive. You better believe he looked out of place. He stood out in the crowd. I mean, I think he single-handedly brought the average age way up. And here's the thing. I can't remember a single other person who attended this show, but I do remember he was there. That's different. That stands out. That makes it memorable. And then there's this other piece. While he was there, he actually interacted. There's no way he liked this music. There's zero chance he liked this music. I guarantee he was listening to jazz on the way over, and his ears were probably ringing all the way home. But he went, he listened, he talked about things that he thought were really interesting afterwards. And what we have as a result of this is a story that we really love, that both of us love to share and remember and connect over. My dad has a solid brand. He's dad brands for bad bands. That's kind of the thing I would throw out for that. But I think this is the thing. We oftentimes, when we get into the world of branding, we get really like hung up on kind of corporate mentality. And instead we forget that like the thing that makes a person memorable, that makes them someone you look up to or want to connect with, those are the same things that make a brand something you want to look up to or connect with. And a lot of it starts with like, what's the culture you've created? What are the values that are inherent to who you are? That's the stuff you really want to find first. Consistency in a brand comes from your values and the culture you create, the way you show up. You can change your shirt because the shirt doesn't matter that much. You can stand out in the crowd. That'll make you memorable. It's the person wearing the shirt, the way you treat people, how you show up at the heart of it all that matters. So if I go back to those 4 things that we had there as possible things, yes, some of you preempted it. All of them matter. They matter so much, but they also matter in the right place. They don't matter universally across every element of your brand. They matter in different ways for different elements of your brand. So if I talk about that one side of being consistent, what I want to look at consistency is I want to look at consistent kinds of relationship, shared values, shared behaviors. Now, where we often get this wrong is we think that consistent means using the exact same visuals every single time in every campaign and every piece everywhere. And there is some value to that. There's a certain amount of consistency that can be helpful there, but absolute consistency there is actually just a really great way to get people to forget that anything is happening. The relationship, the values of the organization, the way it behaves and acts towards people, that's the stuff you want to have rock solid, absolute consistency on it. That's the heart of your brand that needs to not move. When we think about distinctive, that's the thing that helps you get seen, lets you get noticed. That's the thing where you are standing in the emo show looking like no one else. That should come from your personality and your visual presentation. That's something that needs to stand out. Now, there's other things that also could be distinctive. Your voice can be distinctive. There's a number of things that this all brushes in, but these are the typical concerns of this particular area. And notice that the visuals are sitting in distinction rather than just inconsistent, because there's things that each of these do really well that it's easier to work with. Now, on the interactive level, a brand isn't just about shouting at people till they believe it. A brand also needs to listen. And that's why things like research really matter. I also put interactive specifically in the way that you think of a brand voice or tone, because this is another one where people often get into that like overly consistent mindset. People think about a brand voice as like, oh, we need to sound exactly the same way all the time, everywhere. And yeah, that can kind of work. But then think about this in like a human space. A person speaks differently in different scenarios and situations. Like there's a way you talk when you first meet. There's a way you talk when you spent time together. There's a way you talk when things go wrong. There's a way you talk when you part. There are just different kind of things that come up. Now, that doesn't mean you want to sound like an entirely different person every one of those moments, but you need to respond to the situation. You need to be interactive. And so if you're like saying the exact same words in every scenario, you actually might just be ignoring what people are saying back to you and not hearing people, which is an important part of brand work. Listening and responding and interacting, not just saying things no matter what happens on the other way. And then that last side of things, the story-driven thing. Now, story, I mean, there's no word that's been attached to branding more than story in the last couple of years. And story matters. Like, I love story. I am not going to downplay any of these pieces of it. But one thing I think people don't realize is like story is just a part of it. Like the story of your brand is the thing that helps you hold attention. And very particularly, I want to make it really clear when we're talking about story, we are talking about a story your brand is telling about your brand together with your audience. It's not the story of who you are in your own. It's not your history. Your story is not your history. Your story is about a journey that you are on together with the audiences that you are interacting with. And so this is the fundamental philosophy that's going to be running through a lot of these things. Now, there are, of course, with any philosophy, there are case studies and examples of ways that you could actually challenge all of this. But I think this is a really nice fundamental starting point to work from, framework to work from. But that lives in a little bit of the abstract. So what does that look like when we actually bring it into literal brand moments, when we bring that brand out into public? What does it mean for us when we enter an advertising space? What separates a great brand moment from something that might be what I would describe as professional garbage? When an ad boldly hits on the levels where it's consistent, distinctive, interactive, and story-driven in the right spots. I'd love to show you. I want to show you what I would call, in my own opinion, and this is just my opinion, you can feel free to challenge it, the greatest and worst brand moments of the last decade. So let's see it. What's the greatest brand moment of the last decade, according to me? Here she is. The best ad ever made. And also just love that animation. The best ad ever made. I firmly believe this, and you can ask any designer I've been working with. I throw it out there as the thing I think is the best thing I've ever seen so often. This is a legitimate ad made by the city of Los Angeles in an attempt to hire a graphic designer. This thing, undoubtedly made in Microsoft Paint, complete with misspelling for some reason, squares that are just thrown on there, I don't know why, a pixelated city seal, and the whole thing, I would say from an execution standpoint, it'd be safe to trust that executing this thing probably just took a handful of minutes. It is visually terrible, but it is brilliant and beautiful and perfect. It only gets better when you see it showing up like in TV and online in different spaces. Like, look at how awesome that social media post is. Just a long URL thrown over the top of that thing. Why is this ad something I would call as the best of the 20th century? It really understands its audience so well. Like it communicates so honestly with the people who most need to care, designers, Angelinos. There are no promises or pretense here. The city really needs a graphic designer, and it is clear from the ad. It also more helpfully shows that it understands designers. Like this is humor they'll get. This is the thing that addresses designers' biggest concern. Like think about this. If anyone's wondering about whether or not they want to apply for this kind of job, somebody who's a designer, like one of their first thoughts are, what kind of designer wants to work for a city? Like who grows up dreaming that? For most people, that would sound boring, restrictive, legal. And then you see this ad, humor, humility, willingness to be creative, to do something kind of bold and daring. That's a place that a designer would want to work. So the city isn't presenting itself as knowing about design, but they're showing that they're willing to have fun and make a space that would be enjoyable for a designer to be a part of. It's so different too. And that's the other thing I want to just say, like, this ad is so different. It flies in the face of every assumption of what a city government would be willing to do. It cuts through the noise. It looks like nothing else around it. Nothing else has been advertised this way. And that is beautiful because what I see in this is that they understood what actual risk was. They understood that risk when it comes to branding and advertising, risk is not really about creating something that looks bold. It's not about, like, it's not risky to make something that is surprising or odd looking. What's really risky is getting ignored. Like making something that looks so much like what is expected out there that you're just in the sea of people trying to get it into attention. Like we live in such a noisy world. And just imagine with the advent of AI content generation, it's just going to get noisier and busier. The real risk isn't doing something different or making something ugly or even looking unprofessional. Trust me, no one came to the conclusion that LA is unprofessional from that ad. The real risk is wasting time and creating something that looks and sounds like every single other person. Like this is a risk. When you make stuff that looks and sounds like everyone else and people don't notice, it might look polished, but it's risky. This, on the other hand, a bold, memorable approach to a brand is not a risk. It's kind of awesome. One of these things you will be able to recall 30 minutes from now when we cut off all this stuff and we'll move on to our next thing in our day. The other one will blissfully blend into the sea of a million things that you've already seen in your life. Be the awesome version. That's kind of my thing here. You got to get noticed. But I didn't promise to just show you the thing that I think is the best or the greatest ad and the greatest brand moment. I also said, what's the worst? So if that's my greatest brand moment in the last decade, what does it look like to get it right in the wrong places? Well, friends, something you might be familiar with. Oh yeah, Fire Festival. Polished execution, professional design, great image selection, incredibly consistent imagery, celebrity sponsors, gourmet chefs, everything people want to hear. And of course, we know it was all a lie. A festival that didn't even really exist in any form like what it said it was. A flashy, enticing visual without any substance. It worked for a very short while. They sold tickets, at least until they landed in court. And here's the thing, like deception aside, from a visual perspective, this thing, Fire Festival's visual identity, looks and sounds like literally every vacation ad that was made at the time. In a few years, people will remember the bad event. They won't remember what that logo actually looked like. The logo here, it's not the brand. Fire Festival's brand ended up being the Kraft cheese sandwich in a styrofoam box that what they called gourmet. The piles of trash around the FEMA tents, and lies that they told people trying to make a quick dollar. That is what happened for their brand story. And that's the thing that we have to watch out for. Over-relying on something that seems polished, professional, consistent in the visuals without thinking about the heart of the brand, who you're trying to talk to, how you're trying to act. Let's save branding from being about making a polished and presentable logo. It's not a logo. Your brand's not a logo. It's not a layout. It's not even a story, actually. It's not being professional. It's much more essential than that. It's honestly so much more simple than that. Your brand should be thought of as a shared adventure that you are taking with your audience. And adventure matters so much here because brand isn't a static thing. It's active. You're not just with your audience stuck in one place. You are going places together. You are both growing, learning, changing, and moving forward. You can prepare and plan for that adventure, but you're also going to have to make some decisions each day in the moment. And how you finish at the end is probably going to be a little bit different than how you start. Brand's something you experience together as you move through the world. And again, I also want to say, like, beyond it just being an adventure, that audience can represent a huge group of people. We often talk about audience for brands and really specifically mean like customers or members or subscribers. But so many people interact with a brand, and they're all part of the audience in different ways. Friends of people who work at a company are a part of the audience. Employees, their family, partners, communities, customers, members. Heck, the one that gets most ignored often is the detractors. And the detractors can be some of the most helpful people for a brand because they're the ones who are willing to say things that you have opportunities to grow in. So don't write them off either. They're part of your audience. They're helpful. So whenever I start to think about a brand project, one of the very first questions that comes to mind, because I think of it in that adventure space, is what is that shared experience you're trying to create with your audience? What experience are you sharing with your audience? What's the hike that you guys are going to take look like? Is it sunny skies? Are you making it through some rain? What is going on in the world and where are you trying to go together? What could that feel like? What could that look like? How are you going to prepare for it? Now, again, for some folks that can get really abstract. So I do have an exercise that I use often internally to kind of prepare for this kind of work. And I wanted to share it with you today. This is a very simple exercise that you can apply to a brand that exists already or a brand that you are thinking about revisiting or adjusting. And it does get back to kind of a basic marketing tactic, like thinking about where you're at today, where you want to be, and how things might change or look different or grow. Now, there are some things in here that I probably can define to help you. If we're looking on the left-hand side, where things are today, what's the experience you're trying to craft today or you have crafted today? There's two buckets in here. One is the functional side of the experience today, the ways that you equip people to achieve a goal. We offer the ability for people to what? What is the thing that you are enabling for people? And that is phrased that way very specifically because this is not about just literally writing your services in there. It's not about literally writing your products. It's about what do you enable for people? You're giving people the ability to achieve what? What are they trying to do that you're helping them with? What can they achieve because of your work? That's the functional good that you're bringing to them. And that functional good matters, but there's also the side of it that's the emotional good, the experience, the understanding, the thing a person feels about themselves. You know, the cliche is that people will forget what you say, but they won't forget how you make them feel. That cliche exists for a reason. People forget the details of what you do, but they won't forget how you make them feel. And so knowing what you're doing today and how you make people feel today matters so much. But it also is the thing that you want to think about how you want to make them feel by the end. Now, on the other side, we think about how we're building. Where's it going? We're building a future. We're getting a little ambitious here. And I would say the left side, you want to kind of assess where you're at. The right side, you want to be ambitious. This is the side of you where it's like, I think everyone at some point in their life dreams of like making the world a little bit better. You want to bring that little person back out and give them some space over here to think about like, what is the better world we could contribute to? Here's how I might fill this out. I think that's also probably helpful. There's so many things you could write in these different boxes. We offer the people the ability to blank, to achieve what? I like grow your life. I like a number of different things you could put in there, thinking about your own organizations. What might you write in? You might even just start trying to write them in right now. And also emotionally, we help people feel like you could make people feel understood, seen, happy, taken care of, supported, at ease, excited. There's so many things that you could make people feel. A few things you can do with this. You could take this and you could think about it from the perspective of just reaching clients and connecting with customers. What do you enable for them? How do you make them feel? You could also do this internally for your employees, your coworkers, your volunteers. What do you enable in their life? How do you make them feel? If you can identify those things, you can really understand how people think about your brand today, and you can also craft that experience in a more powerful way. On the other side, where we're getting ambitious, I think this is the place where, like, for sure, whatever your first answer is, make it even more bold. Make the most bold vision of a beautiful future that you possibly can, because the more bold you say something, the more powerful the marketing behind it can be. You can also do that even with your ideas of today. So for instance, like let me just take that emotional side of experience today. We help people feel curious. Curious is actually a really lovely word. There is some power to it. Like a safe version of the word curious might be interested. If I build a campaign or a brand where we're just like, well, we're just trying to make people interested, it's kind of soft. Whereas if I say like, I'm trying to make people curious, now I've got like, oh, there's some tactics here. How do I generate curiosity in someone's life? There's something a little more interesting. Now I could even amplify it further and say like, how do I make people obsessed with something? A brand in my life that hits that mark is like Poppy Soda. Give me every can, please. I will hang on your every flavor release that you have. The more interesting the words you put in these lines, the more powerful they get. Like, let me just like I'll fully do this off the top of my head, but like we help people feel curious. What does an ad that for a brand like that sound like, look like? Does it look like a sales rep finding a strange medallion in their yard, and then they start digging up research on it online, and then they realize that their house is under the remains of an ancient Roman shipwreck that makes you a media star and ignites an interest in history and has you touring museums and on TV all across the nation? And suddenly you've grown your life to a place you never came, and it all came from being curious about the thing you found in your yard. Like there's an ad behind that we can build. But let's also look at that in like real life, because that's a little bit, maybe a little bit weird, a little bit wacky. Here's a way I might break down an ad and use this kind of approach to think about how we build something. Let's just imagine for a second, we're all a cough drop company. Functionally, what do we actually do? We offer people the ability to breathe easy. That's what we're trying to do, which actually is nice. There's even an emotional feeling to that, but there's also just a practicality to that, which is really nice. On the emotional side, they actually just played it a little bit safe. Like, well, we make people feel not so bad, which is kind of fun because it already tells you about the personality that may come through. What questions might this bring up? When I see this, I think about like, okay, if you help people make people feel not so bad, like, what's the worst that can happen with a cough? What's the worst thing that could happen there? And I'm like, oh, well, if you cough at the wrong time. And what does that lead to? An ad that looks like this. Really clever, really powerful moments, but just built on some simple grounding ideas where you're thinking about like what's the good that you bring to it. A lot of these wild, fun ad ideas, what's behind them is that they're starting from a point of thinking like, how do we want to connect with people functionally? What are we doing for them functionally? How do we want them to feel emotionally? And then letting the questions that occur build from that. Instead of saying like, well, here's our product. We need to make sure we slap that product on there and put our information right next to it. There's a space for that. It's also, I think, more properly considered sales than it is considered marketing. First, you need to get people's attention. Then you can give them the information that helps them actually buy and complete that sale. Now, I want to pause for a second because I realize I've thrown a lot of things at you already. And maybe I've ruffled feathers. I don't know. I never know. Sometimes I do. And ruffled feathers can be excited. They can be angry. Both are valuable. I love them. I don't know if you have already from just the things I've thrown out real quickly questions that have come up, but I'm happy to take a pause to take a couple of them right now. This is the part where I also drink water.
I'm gonna pop back in. It's really hard for me to stay off camera. I'm over here laughing.
Peace.
I was doing some searching. I wanted to find if they got a really great graphic designer for that position, and I couldn't find a
Oh,
resolution, but I was doing some digging and it got a lot of media coverage. So then that was kind of accidental PR too.
yeah, yeah. Okay, I know that the person who got this job went to where I got my MFA in design.
Oh,
Um,
really?
yeah, because that was one of the reasons it also was like very on my radar because I'm like everyone at our school wanted to apply for it all of a sudden.
Oh my gosh, that's
But
awesome.
I know one of the I forget who exactly it was, but I remember like awesome, that's so cool.
That was super cool. All right,
Nice.
I'm gonna slide back into the abyss here.
Love it. Y'all doing okay? Chat people, let me know how you're feeling. I see it, Carrie. I love you. Nothing ruffled, turn it up. Big fan. Oh, I love we just sold some MS Paint for some people. This is so great. Oh, I love it. If my lasting legacy in like design and brand is to get more people to do stuff in MS Paint, I am so happy about that. Oh my gosh. Very cool. Well, I love you all 200 of my new closest friends. And Mary Miller's here. Mary, I really like you. You're a lovely person. I love you all. I'm sorry if I don't call you out your name. I just can't follow all of them, but sometimes I see them and I'm just like, oh, I have to say something. All right. About halfway in, 30 minutes in, all good campers know that before we start marching off into the wilderness, it is real good to bring a map. Like we need to prepare. It's time to familiarize ourselves with a map of one of the most incredible parts of the brand camp space, the brand trail. So we've laid just a foundation, how we're going to be thinking about a brand adventure together and where we need to be consistent and where we need to learn to be open and flexible. Now we want to start thinking about like, how are we going to walk this thing together? What does it look like? Fortunately, we do have a map, and the map looks like this. It's a brand trail, the path you are walking together with your audience. I think of a group like Pivot, like what we do, as kind of like a trail maintenance team. We try to make the path clear and offer advice on the best way forward. But then we get back and we're letting you walk that trail with the people that you're going. Oh, yeah, right. Backpacking is glorious. Yes. Now, they actually do have some purpose behind these things. Like at the trailhead, I think of that as this place that you meet your hiking buddy, you meet your audience, you take inventory of what you have with you, what you're hoping to achieve. You're making that last check on your plans and what you know and what you've brought to get ready to go. That's kind of like often the research phase, the place where you're gathering stuff. Then you have that spot where what I would call the trail's most prominent feature, and it comes up real fast. You have to climb Brand Mountain. It's the thing you have to summit to have the best experience. You make your brand elements, you craft clear stories, you construct guidelines, and you're trying to get to that exciting experience at the top of the mountain. But that's not where your trail ends. Because even once you've crafted this whole thing, you've already established and started a great experience, then you need to keep finding little moments of wonder along the trail. The moments on the trail that create memories, that's that trail magic. All those little details that make the brand sticky as you get further on the trail. They fit the things that breathe life into your hike. The greeting a person offers, the time an employee went out of their way to help someone, the shirt someone wore that a kid looked up and said, I want to be like them, the ad they can't forget. Those are all trail magic moments. It's all those tangible touch points and connections. Of course, no good trail really happens without getting just a little bit lost. And that's where we could enter into the lost wilderness, the place where we have wandered off trail and we need to find our way back. Now, most people would think of that as a bad thing. It is not. It's only a bad thing if you stay in the lost wilderness. The lost wilderness is an incredible opportunity to make a discovery and correct course and get back to something. Often your best hiking stories are the ones where you recovered from being lost. Like that's the most memorable kind of experience. That's really powerful. And then, of course, there is the last piece here, finding your North Star, the thing that guides you to where you want to go, the thing that keeps your brand focused and headed in the right direction. So if you just think about your organizations, where you are working today, I'd be curious about like, based on just the little bit that I've said right there, a little bit of what you know so far, you're going to have to make some assumptions. Where do you think your organization needs to focus a little bit? Maybe it's at the trailhead. We need to learn more about our audience. Maybe we forgot someone at the trailhead and we need to come back for them. Maybe it's still searching for its North Star. It feels like it's maybe getting a little bit wandering and lost. Feel free. This is a safe space. You can type numbers in there and be like, this is where I think we're at today. Maybe something strikes you as you just need to hear more. I also could say like, you could also type in a number and it doesn't have to be like, this is what we don't do well. It could just be like, this is the thing I think I want to hear more about for my organization. It's this piece of it. Oh, I love it. Thank you for getting us started, folks. You have that trailhead where you're learning about people. You have that climbing brand mountain where you're actually constructing all the guidelines and the ideas so you get to a peak experience. You have the trail magic where you're living out that brand. You're finding moments of magic along the way. You have the lost wilderness where you maybe have wandered a little bit to some place and you need to figure out how to get back, which involves finding your North Star, the thing that pulls you back to the place you need to be, that helps you find the way out. Love it. Love this. Love this. This is like my favorite way to assess the thing because it's so like non-painful. I think every brand moves through these. And even though I call this a trail that has a trailhead and kind of has a conclusion, the reality is when you're working a brand, like you could be bouncing between these. You might be hiking for a while and then realize, oof, shoot, we need to go back to the trailhead and remember like who are we hiking with now? There's some new people here that we didn't realize. Like there's just your brand could cycle through different moments of all of these, and a healthy brand is always going to need to be working on one or more of these. Love it. Okay, we are going to dive into a few of these. I saw almost all of them come up, which is great. Particularly seems like we got a lot of 2, 3s, 4s. Okay. So as we get into some of these, think about like questions you might have, because I'm not going to be able to dive in deep today on all of these. I'm going to give you a layout, but again, our follow-up sessions are going to dive a little bit more into each one of these pieces. So if we're thinking about the trailhead, here's how I think about that trailhead more specifically. It's where you meet your hiking buddy, take inventory, and prepare for the road ahead. Different organizations have different ways of doing this, but almost all of them have a kind of similar purpose. You will see so many tools associated with like that assessment, research moment, discovery moment in a brand. There are brand audits. There are brand positioning statements. There are competitive landscape assessments. There are focus groups, personas, demographic data. All of them super helpful. All of them just kind of a different way of getting at the same core idea, figuring out a handful of things. Who are you? Who are you trying to connect with? And who else is in the landscape? So you have that, who are you? What are the values and services and impact that you create? Who is your audience? What values do they have? What needs do they have? What goals are they trying to achieve? And you have your competition. What kind of things are they bringing to the front? And a competitive landscape is a great place to think here. Now, what most people are trying to find, and what you really should be trying to find for your brand, is that lovely top overlap section that is described as glory. The place where what you do, the values you have, the services you have, the impact you make overlap with an audience's values, needs, and goals. You want to find that moment is the most powerful brand space. And usually in a Venn diagram like this, you want to find the middle where everything overlaps. But in this case, if you find the middle, you're going to be in a hard place of competition with the other people who are saying and doing the exact same as you. You got to find that separate spot. And you certainly want to avoid the spot where you're just overlapping only with the interests of the competition and not the audience, because why? Or you really don't want to emphasize the spot where your competition is better at overlapping with the values and needs of your audience, because it's just a bad idea. It's a great way to not promote yourself. So finding the thing that is unique, a unique connection point that is honest, that is valuable between what you do and what an audience is looking for. That is the stuff. And I'm not going to dive into a ton on this because we're going to be talking particularly one of our next sections about finding your true north. We're going to get a little bit more into this kind of strategic area, but this is the kind of thing you're hunting for in this phase. Now, the thing I also do want to warn you for, I want to make sure you know this. Brand research is super helpful. It is so good. Like, you don't know what you don't know. Operating on an assumption is a great way to, you can finish that phrase. The reason that, but you also want to be careful with it. Sometimes I've seen people misuse data with the way they've done research. And not us, because Steve is a rock star at research over at Pivot, but I have seen it happen out in the world. That people get data from something, they see an average, and they think they have to aim for the average. The problem is there is no actual average person. Just think about this literal, like a literal example. This is a very simplistic way of explaining it. If you were to take 10 people or 20 people and have them react to your brand, 10 of them hate it. 10 of them think it is the greatest thing ever. Your average is a super neutral, doesn't care about anything person. And that is not true. Like, you don't actually have 20 people who feel very neutral about you. You have very passionate people on either side. Understanding the details of that matters. So don't just look at an average and think that you're getting good information, because there is no actual average person. Averages can be helpful, but you don't want to lean on them too much as a way of making decisions. You want to look at the cases and figure out how you can connect with people, because the passion is actually more powerful in many ways. One of the things that I really love and often say about, I've often quoted and stolen a quote from on research, is that you've got to be careful with all forms of it. And you also have to be careful with focus groups, assumptions, and feedback. Because most people are just not really good at saying what they really think and what they really do. Like, we make statements about things because we think that's what you're supposed to say. If you ask anyone what they want most from your company, they will probably say, I want it to be less expensive and easier to get. Reasonable. That's a thing that someone should say. Like, if I can get something for less money, that feels like I'm being pragmatic. In reality, we see people not operating that way. Like, people don't always make the cheapest choice. If we were all operating on that thing we just said, it wouldn't happen. So all this is to say, like, no matter how much data you consume, no matter how much research you take in, you got to look at it in detail. And you also need to realize that no matter how much you take in, you're going to have to make a choice. It's rare to get complete consensus. It's rare to have absolute certainty. How I kind of explain it is research is going to give you a map that is wildly valuable. It helps you see your best route. It helps you carve out spaces, but it's not going to take you on the hike itself. You're going to have to do that part with your feet. You got to do your best to prepare, do the research, but also be prepared to adjust, because that's often the case. So it's a claim and a warning. It's great to assess, and I absolutely advocate always investing in it. It's the thing you need to do, but you also don't want to become too indebted to your data, because there are times when the data is not exactly the guide. Whew. There's a bold statement that maybe could ruffle a feather or two. Maybe. I don't know. But let's look at the next section of here. So if that's the trailhead where we're trying to understand our audience, our competition, where we're going. Then we have Brand Mountain, the thing you and your audience are trying to summit together in pursuit of the best experience you possibly can have, a great brand experience. I've got what I think is my most carefully crafted infographic of the day for you. Bam. Great way to understand it. Here's what Brand Mountain really looks like. It's made up of different things. At its base, you see tools and elements. Having nice fonts, words, logos, or colors to work with. Those things matter. But I'm also going to tell you this. And note, I am from a design background. Having nice fonts, words, logos, colors, they matter. It's also the least important part of the mountain and the easiest thing to change. Okay? That's a reality there. Sometimes, again, people get into brand and they think it's all about having a great logo, all about having great colors. Yes, those things help. They are valuable, but it is the easiest part to change. If we get to that middle section, values and communication, clear values and communication of those values makes your life a lot easier. Now, it gives you notable things to work with. It makes most of your work a lot simpler. In the choice between great fonts and great values, I choose great values every single time. And most people will with an organization. Like, oh, I really wanted that nice font, but this is the better organization. Like that can win out. Of course, there will be people who initially choose the better font, and those will be people who are disappointed and leave and change. Now, the top side piece of this, performance. How you actually live out your brand, because actions speak louder than words. This is what it's really all about for a brand. Living out a great brand matters more than anything else. People get real caught up on the bottom of this brand mountain, but whenever you can, you should always trade up. Like, you want to trade up on this mountain. If holding strictly to the tools or elements results in poor communication, loosen up. Change the tools in favor of great communication. If your communication or values get in the way of you taking action, then make the shift you need to live out your brand well. Now, this is actually one where often people get a little worried, like, whoa, shift our values, but that's the thing that needs to be consistent. Yes, but let's just play this out in a very specific way. Let me give you a very specific example. There's an internet provider that we work with who deeply values the excellence of their technology and their work. Actually, it's a lot of them. They communicate strongly about this. They bring the best technology, the most thorough technicians to people's homes. They are experts in their space. Most organizations want that claim in whatever space they're in. And then, of course, COVID hit. And a parent called whose children needed internet in their house to finish school. Legally, the provider wasn't able to enter the house or interact directly. They couldn't install things in the best way, but they saw the need. So they ran a line through an open window and talked to the parent through the setup on the phone and got them connected. Now, that is a point where performing the brand well means challenging your values. They didn't do it in the best technological way. They did it the right way for that moment. That's what I mean when I say live out your brand with a great performance, even if it means fudging things you value or communicate often. Ideally, you hit on every level of this. That's the superpower spot. But if you have to, trade up. Trade up when you can. So there's Brand Mountain. And again, you can bring all kinds of questions to this anytime you want to have, but that's one of my favorite things to think about, because I feel like that living out the brand to life is the thing that I just want everyone to do so badly. Now, that's not where it all ends, though. So we figured out if we have great tools, we have great communication, we are finding ways to perform our brand, then as we're performing the brand, what we are trying to create along the trail is a bunch of these moments of trail magic. The moments along the path where you perform the brand and create lasting memories, those really special connection points. I could talk a very long time about this, and I won't today. I'm sorry about that, but I will just suggest we have a podcast called The Juice. There's an episode called Your Customers Don't Really Care Yet, and I would suggest listening to that a little bit. If you were at Pivot Forward, it is a presentation I gave there. But what it does is it breaks down some of the psychology behind offering trail magic, why each of your touch points matter and how they communicate and how you interact with people at each of those moments. I would really suggest jumping over there and checking that out, because it's a good resource that will go more in depth than I will go today. But I will say this. One thing I really want to say about trail magic, the things you produce, the stuff that happens in the community as you go, I want to point out a couple things. If you're going to produce something from your brand and it's going to connect with people, make that thing worthwhile. Don't print the junk shirt that's scratchy, because that scratchy shirt is going to make people feel a certain way about your brand. It's going to make them remember how that felt. Give it purpose. Make it something nice. Make it something a person wants to wear, to hold, to hear, to engage. Make it wonderful. The material honestly really matters. If you hand me a shirt with stains all over it, or a mug that I can't wash and that kind of smells like strange plastic, I'm gonna have some questions about your commitment to quality. Even if that's unreasonable, like, yeah, you produce some swag. If your swag feels like it's less quality, people will make the automatic connection that you maybe aren't investing in quality everywhere where your brand is going. And so think about that. Like, that, it matters. When you make trail magic, make it worthwhile. It's actually often a better policy to make less trail magic and make real good trail magic. That is often a way, especially if you have a strapped budget, making those selections and being really thoughtful about that. But most of us also operate with a finite budget, and you're like, oh no, I can't spend even more on my shirts. Awesome, totally understand that. But here's the thing that's great about trail magic. Not all trail magic costs any money. Lots of trail magic is just about thinking of ways to make things better without even having to change your price. A good example of this, it's actually something that happened for me because I just had solar panels installed at my house. As we had each stage of development where people are coming onto our property, people from that company have called or texted 30 minutes before to say, hey, we're on our way. Now, some people do that, some people don't do that. But that is a little bit of trail magic. It gives me that strength. Like nothing is more worrisome than when somebody is going to come onto your property and they give you that window of like, well, between 4 and 8. And it ends up being like 9 p.m. the following day when they actually get out there. That's everyone's internal worry when they have that schedule. A tech who calls and lets me know they're going to be when they're going to be there, and they're going to be there in 30 minutes, lets me live my day and gives me a little lovely bit of trail magic that says these people care about me living my life. I love it. Or the other thing that's free trail magic, quick handwritten note, something that someone actually jotted down. You could like people will read something that is handwritten to them because they can see that you personally invested in them. If you want to tell people that you are personally invested in every one of them, do something personal. It's a great way to do it. Doesn't cost extra money, does cost some time. Well, no time is money, but it doesn't cost from your budgeting for your dollars of what you produce. So thinking about that, like where are the places we could add a little bit of magic to our experience? Whether that means investing in a little bit of an upgrade, focusing in on a handful of things that are really powerful moments, or it could even mean thinking about like what can we do without an investment of new dollars that could make an even greater experience for people who are interacting with us at each point along the interactions with our brand. That's the trail magic. Now, not everything goes wonderfully and perfectly along a path. At some point, you get lost in the wilderness. This is the moments when you wander off the trail. Notably, as I said before, I think the lost wilderness sounds like a bad thing, and I don't feel that way about it. People are often so afraid of being off-brand that they try to lock things down and end up squeezing the life out of their brand. As any hiker knows, like some of the best stories come from getting lost. And sometimes when you do something, you make a choice, like I'm going to go a little off trail here. And you find that what you found is a secret magical lake that you never knew existed, and it is the thing you remember most. You got to give yourself the freedom to follow that curiosity every once in a while. Don't be so afraid of getting lost. Be afraid of staying lost. That's the thing you really need to worry about. Notice when you are lost, and don't stay lost, but allow yourself that risk every once in a while when you do it intentionally. Things that could get you lost, because I think this is helpful. Things that could get you lost in the bad way. These are things I would watch for in your brands. Are you trying to do too many things at once? Are you exploring too many directions at the same time? Oftentimes people almost do this in the sake of like, with a mindset of like, oh, we're testing a bunch of things. But if you are testing like 15 different things, it's going to be real hard to tell why one's working and one's not working. Little subtle differences between stuff can be really helpful. You might be hiking with the wrong tools. You might not be checking your compass. But let's look at how this actually plays out. I don't know how many folks on the call have watched Parks and Rec. But I just think that Parks and Rec and Entertainment 720, the media conglomerate that does something, you got to go on in Parks and Rec and type in like Entertainment 720 on YouTube somewhere. You're gonna find like how they pitch this. They are trying to be everything and nothing to everyone all the time. And because they are trying so many different things, no one really understands what they do or how to work with them. And honestly, they're just throwing money against the wall. Too many directions will get you lost. But let's look at something that's like actually tangible and realistic and in real person. Like this is a famous redesign that I would describe as a great case in point of hiking with the wrong tools. Hiking with the wrong tools is a great way to get lost. It creates lots of problems. Like think about this. I wouldn't bring a wetsuit to the desert. So what does that look like in advertising? This happens when you start to jump on the trend bandwagon. You start bringing things that other people brought on their own brand hike and just using it for yourself. A thing I hear often in different meetings is, oh, we want to look like Apple. A, not the worst goal, but B, you aren't Apple. You don't need to be. The question you really want to ask is, what do our people need? What's authentic to us? Tropicana had this really, really nice moment that it kind of epitomizes this. It rebranded to modernize and meet new audiences. They saw that thing, like the trendy thing of the time was going sleek, sans serif, negative space design, so they redesigned. It tried to be the Apple of orange juice, if you will. The problem, no one recognized them. They literally didn't even realize it was orange juice, and sales dropped. Just because something works, just because a design approach works, just because something in a brand works for one group, that doesn't mean it's going to work for every group, and it doesn't mean you should do it. You've got your own landscape to conquer. Bring the tools you need for the hike you are on. And I would be remiss if not to not mention the last problem here. The last thing that could really get you lost is not checking your compass. Now, I don't know if you are familiar with this this time where Pepsi solved all the problems of racial tension and tension between citizens and police officers with a can of Pepsi. But I'd say they lost their compass. Look, this can happen for the best of reasons. Brands want to say wonderful things. But you should only say wonderful things you can reasonably pursue, things you are ready to put your organization behind. It's not about what you want to say, it's what you are ready to step up to the challenge and work on. Pepsi, in the midst of national protests, racial tension, and rising conflicts between citizens and police officers throughout the country, decided it could solve all that tension by having Kendall Jenner share a Pepsi. If only we'd thought of that sooner, how different 2020 might have been. They went big, but for something that's just not backed by their brand or demonstrated by their values well. You can read about how it was received online. I'm not saying don't touch difficult topics. I actually think those are really important when you are connected to them as a brand. I'm saying only touch topics you are able and willing to engage organizationally and put some action behind. When it comes to challenging subjects, make the actions before you make the ads. That's a good thing to have in your mind. You want to do something big and powerful in the world, take the action before you make the ad. That is the way to make sure you are checking your compass before you create a little lost moment that you need to learn from. Now, a last thing here, and I realize we are up at time, so if you have to disappear, I am sorry, but this is the last little piece of the trail. Because if you are lost, the thing that you most need is a North Star, a way forward, the thing that guides you, the simple truth that brings you back to be headed in the right direction, that keeps your brand focused. Now, when I showed that gloriously executed brand mountain, you might have noticed that star hanging out there. Because that is the North Star. The thing that matters most at the end of the day is the feeling you create for the people who interact with you. That's your guide. That's the thing you can't lose sight of, or you will get lost and have a hard time finding your way through. The whole point of brand performance, of brand values, of brand communication, of brand tools and elements is to help share a feeling with people. This is also the thing I think people miss when they get caught up in the world of brand. They get obsessed with something like better logo or even story as the only thing they want to talk about in brand. The thing all work should point to, the story, the logo, the promise, the values, the personality, all of those drive towards creating a wonderful felt experience for the people your brand connects with. Because feeling is the thing that makes things work. Like many organizations come into brand operating on the idea that looks good is a key to success. In reality, great looking or great sounding doesn't matter so much as work that actually feels right. There's a reason we love hole-in-the-wall restaurants, dives, comfort food. They don't usually look good, quote unquote, but they feel right. Feeling is the thing that makes it successful. And of course, the overlap is glorious where things look good and feel good. You need to nail the feeling and be true to it and pursue it at each turn. And of course, there is that amazing world because this is what separates these things. The thing that feels good versus the thing that looks good. Feel good will be success. This is honestly the way that I understand that Chris Do quote that I had earlier. Build the culture the brand will follow. If the thing that you have organizationally feels good, your brand can be built from that and move forward from that. So the question that I want to leave you with, the one thing, if all the rest of it is just a barrage of words and ideas and thoughts, if you want to just ask yourself one thing for your brand that could drastically change everything you do, asking yourself this: how does your brand bring joy to people's lives? That can be the start of a powerful adjustment to your brand that helps you find the feels good thing that you can do. It's not just happiness, by the way. It's joy, fulfillment, confidence, competence, autonomy, strength, curiosity, things that people value. Those bring joy. If you can answer this question briefly in a compelling and honest way, you can build a powerful brand. That's the driving force, the thing everything revolves around. It's a question that focuses on the positive feeling people have with your brand. Build something honest, and people are going to want to be part of it. And that's what I have for you today, friends. I know we're a couple minutes over here. I am happy to hang with questions if we have them, but I know Dawn is back. And I know we want to make sure that we don't steal too much of your time. But thank you so much for being here with us. I saw already there were a couple questions that came in.
I saw there's one in the Q&A here.
Mm.
It's an anonymous one, but I think that is a
Oh,
good
it's so
question.
good.
And then we might need to wrap up. And like Brandon said, we'll continue to answer questions in the next session. And you can always reach out. I think Brandon's going to put my email at the very end here, and you can shoot me emails with the questions, and I can figure out how to channel it if it goes to Brandon or someone else. So,
Love it.
but Brandon, do you want to tackle that one about culture
Oh,
or
I'm
you
happy.
think-
I'm happy to. I think it's
okay.
very involved. I mean, it could be very involved because you want to tailor that to the specific city, but that is real. I think so many people have that. And I do think like a great way to make a
So
failing brand.
the question though, because not everyone can see it, is what if my culture
Oh,
isn't good? How can my brand still flourish?
so good, so relevant.
Hmm.
Um, and I really, it is trite, but I do think like in that scenario, the thing you want to change is the culture first. This is actually an overlap place between a few different things that we do at Pivot, because I often think people see like brand as one thing, customer experience is another thing, employee experience is another thing. They are all one big unit of things that affect each other. And so one of the things you might want to look at is what is culturally not working well at your organization. Start to put names to that. Take the drama out of it and just get it on the table to talk about it. And then start to work towards addressing that. Because as you start to address those things, you're going to find that you're crafting a new culture. And honestly, even just the act of creating spaces where it's possible to talk about the things that aren't feeling so great at an organization, that by itself can be culture changing. That just even having a safe space for that, it's so good. Um, Now, of course, there's a number of things I'd want to factor into how I'd literally approach it, which would be based on like how comfortable do I feel at the organization, how much voice do I have, how many people do I need to gather around me, because I know it's great in support. But I would say for sure, like that person, I'd be like, reach out to Dawn because I'd love to find out more about your particular situation to think about like how would I approach this in your scenario. I think that's a real one though. I think I've heard that so many times from different
Hmm.
people, and that the one thing I will say is for sure the way to solve it is not to suddenly create a new logo and think people will be tricked into it. Like we're gonna have a different experience because what you will have done is spent a bunch of money on like a fire festival logo for people to realize that it's still the same old company that's doing nothing different.
Hmm. Everything leads back to Fire Festival.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah,
Okay,
it's culture change. You got to change, you got to start working on internally on the culture of the company and what happens there and let that then lead you to a brand change.
agreed.
Yep.
Brandon,
Oh,
can
and
you
Dawn's
land?
email.
Yes,
Yes.
can you land on that last slide that
Yes.
has my email? Can,
Camp counselor Dawn Myers
yes,
is here for you.
I'm also a camp counselor. Um, Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. This was awesome, Brandon. I feel like we could just continue on for hours and hours, and I could just sit back and listen. So, mic drop for you. Well done. Um, Please join us on June 20th for our next webinar, Finding Your Brand's True North. And then in the meantime, we should have Pivot Plus Forum next week. If you're a part of Pivot Plus, please check your email for an invite to that. And then following the next webinar, we'll have a video that we're working on. We'll be doing a podcast. There might be some guest appearances there. And then 2 final webinars for this series. And then, like Brandon said, we will have camp snacks
We
scattered
will.
throughout. So
We're
look on our
committed to it. It's
social,
in public.
yes, look on our social channels for little snacks here and there. We want this to be a full summer of camp. So we will see you on the next one. Please reach out if you have any more questions. How does one join Pivot Plus? Please shoot me an email and I can fill you in. Any last words, Brandon?
Uh, I mean, here is a great, I really do think take time, take that, like the couple of places where I had questions, literally take a little time to try and write these down. Even if it's negative, if your response is like, I can't figure out where we bring joy to life, you could also ask the question of where could we? What could it
Mm.
look like? Because I've often found that's a great way to approach things. It's
This is
real
also
frustrating.
a good question just to ask yourself. I'm like,
Yeah,
how am I
it's
bringing joy to people in my
for sure.
life?
I just realized like this is actually a thing that I have learned because I am often like a super squeaky wheel for changing things around places. And one thing I will give one more piece of advice to that. What if my culture is a good? Try to find the opportunities to grow it positively. Find the
Hmm.
ways like it's very easy to point at a thing, and be like, we're not doing this well. But helping to take that next step of like, what does it look like to do it well is really helpful. Because oftentimes when someone's not doing something well, it's because they just don't see that there's a different way. They don't realize it.